like to ask you if you felt that you had to be a terrorist writer, or that the writer should be a terrorist writer, because you meant something that had to do with your father's conflict, and it was more in that relation that you felt that you had to inflict pain, you had to inflict suffering. And thirdly, I would like to ask you also if it is possible that the fact that you wrote always in English, and the English is your mother tongue, makes you unable to be, I would put it this way, the fact that you have express yourself in English means that you are quite integrated already, because you cannot express all the anger and all the division and all the conflict you feel in that language, because if you do it in that language, you are already incorporating what the language is. Thank you.
I always wanted to be a British writer. I grew up in Britain. I was born in Britain. My father spoke Punjabi, he spoke Urdu, he spoke English with us. The rest of my family spoke in Urdu amongst themselves. But I wanted to be a British writer, and I saw myself as a post-colonial writer, by which I mean that the writers that I grew up with liking, E.M. Forster, War, Conrad, etc., all wrote, actually most of the major British writers of the first part of the 20th century wrote about colonialism from the point of view of the British. I wanted to write about colonialism later on, what happened when Britain became a multicultural, multiracial society. What happened when, my dad wrote about what happened when the British went to India. I wanted to write about what happened when the Indians went to Britain. And I wrote, I guess, at the beginning out of anger because of racism, because of not being part of Britain, and because I was trying to figure out, I'm also a comic writer, but I was angry about it. But I wanted to figure out what we had to do politically to make Britain multicultural, multiracial, and how that would work and what it would do. How you created the future through writing. I don't really like the term writer as terrorist. I think the writer has to be a devil, has to be difficult. I think this is really important. I don't think the writer necessarily has to do that himself or herself. I think of, say, Harold Pinter's plays being done in Prague during the communist period, for instance. Pinter's plays were considered, and indeed Shakespeare's plays, to be radical and difficult and subversive. Not because Pinter had intended that, because of the place of the writer at that time. You can see that with Ai Weiwei, for instance, in China. He makes, for instance, very, very beautiful pots. They are also profoundly subversive. He is profoundly subversive because of not necessarily anything that he may or may not say, but because of who he is and what he represents. So it's the writer as representative, the writer who speaks for a certain idea of freedom that is important, rather than the writer, as it were, directly attacking the state. You can see that also with Kafka too, for instance, or Beckett, writers who are not, obviously subversive in themselves, you might not say, or certainly not political, but whose position makes them, let's say, difficult or devilish or awkward or difficult to digest. It's that I was talking about earlier. It interests me more.
You maybe didn't talk about your experience of directing, and I haven't seen that film. What was that experience like, and would you direct another film?
I directed a film in the 90s called London Kills Me. And I directed it because I thought I would try it to see whether I could do it. Once I'd done it, I thought I'd have to learn how to be a director now. And I thought, I really want to be a novelist. I can't learn how to direct movies and be a novelist at the same time. It's like being Prime Minister and running the marathon. I can't, you just can't put them together. It's too difficult to do all those things. Being a movie director is more than a full-time job. Being a novelist is a different kind of job, a different kind of experience. I don't know anybody who could do both those things. So I had to make a choice. And I work with directors. I work with Stephen Frears and numerous other movie directors, and they're much better directors than me. So I stopped doing it and went back to doing what I thought I did best, which was being a writer. it's a different experience, really. I mean, you're in a room on your own all the time for years of your life. And I like that. It suits me fine. If you're a movie director, you're working with hundreds of people and lots of other people's money all the time. And I found that quite difficult and uncomfortable. It just wasn't my thing.
I was just wondering, how involved are you in the projects that are given from the writing to the film? How involved are you in the process?
With a movie, you mean?
Yeah, with the filmmaking. Like, do you visit the sets and say, okay, it shouldn't be like this, or do you
Well,
just
I've got a
hand it
film
over?
being made at the moment, and I don't think I'm going to visit the set. But Roger and Michelle, who's directing it, and I spent ages talking about it. And we talk on the phone now and again when he speaks to me and I'm speaking to him. We argue about it, and he knows me and I know him, so he knows what I would want and what I would dislike. Sometimes he has ideas that I think are really bad ideas, and then we have a tremendous row about it. So it's a really conflictual, difficult relationship. But as I said earlier, it's a creative relationship. It's a good relationship. You know, you don't hate each other so much that you destroy each other. You dislike each other enough for it to be alive between you, that you speak the truth to them and them to you. If it starts being destructive, then you've had it. Then you stop. It will be advisable, you know, like a marriage, for you to stop doing it. But as long as your hatred is creative and your fury with them and them with you, and you know, it's a very tough relationship because there's a lot at stake with a movie. You know, this movie could be a catastrophe. You could waste a lot of money. You could waste a lot of time. These are really good actors, and they could, you know, it could be stupid. So the arguments you have are really important, you know. And you don't have those arguments and debates when you're doing a novel. You might have that if you're making an album, working, you know, in a band and so on. And you do fall out. You have to risk that. I mean, in the end, the project is more important than the friendship, actually, when you're doing a movie. In the end, I want to do this movie. He wants to do this movie. It's more important than our friendship. We could just be mates and have dinner now and again and gossip. But actually, we're working together, and it's a much more intense, stranger, and more difficult thing.
How do you relate to the bodies of the actors when they give a corpus to your characters?
I've worked with fantastic
You've
actors.
worked with
I've had some
wonderful
great
actors.
actors. I've had Vanessa Redgrave, Peter O'Toole, Roshan Seth, Daniel Craig, Daniel Day-Lewis. Terrific actors in my films, and they always improve what I do. You know, if you've got Vanessa Redgrave saying your lines, there are 3 scenes in The Mother with Vanessa Redgrave and Peter O'Toole, and they are so moving, and they're so beautiful, and they're very simply written, and you look at them, and I weep when I see those scenes. This old married couple are sort of saying goodbye to each other, and he says he's dying. You weep when you see them, because these are the best actors you could ever have in the whole world, and they are so, it's so tasteful and beautiful. And you think, I am blessed to have such fantastic actors saying such, you know, rather banal lines. But the actors, you know, you write, as I said earlier, you write a space for the actors to do that. You keep it very, very simple.
Okay, I'm going to close. Just one last question, because it occurred to me, I didn't ask it. London is a character in your writing, in your novels and in your stories. There are 2 Londons in contemporary writing these days. There's the trashy, messy London, which is like yours, and there's the proper bourgeois London of Hampstead and the good neighborhoods. At the same time, Martin Amis writes about trashy London, and you write about trashy London, and Zadie Smith, who's, I think, has been influenced by you, write about trashy London. Do you still see London, the big metropolis, that way?
I very rarely leave my neighborhood. I don't go very far. But the whole world is in my neighborhood, you know, and indeed the whole world is in the cafe near my house. You know, you talk to the waiters, you see, you know, and you can write about a little bit of London. It seems to me to be like the rest of it. I don't know if it's.
So you don't need to go to the suburbia anymore to know what's happening.
You just look around you and you find a little bit of it, and it's representative. It seems like the rest of it. That's what an artist does. In any story or any piece of the world, you find a little bit, And that little bit, that one story, what happens between those two people stands for everything else. People recognize that. That's what you want to do. It's there. It's looking at that, looking at that, looking at that an artist does. And that suddenly the rest of the world comes into focus around it, as it were. It's just finding the right bit. You know, you can't write about immigration, but if you take the story of one immigrant and tell it, then you see that somehow it stands for more of that. I mean, I write about London, but I don't really. I write about these characters in London and this stuff happening to them. I don't think there's a trashy London or a posh London, or I think there's just the people and what happens between them, actually.
Okay, thank you very much, Hanif Kureishi. I think we've done here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Obrigada.